I opened my mailbox on a Tuesday morning and found 17 credit card bills I never applied for. Total balance, $43,000. When I called the companies, they read back my daughter-in-law's phone number as the contact. That's when I knew I wasn't just dealing with debt. I was dealing with identity theft by family. I'm Patricia Morrison, and I'm 70 years old. For most of my life, I've been what people would call careful. I worked as an accountant for 38 years, managed my finances with precision, paid every bill on time, and retired with a credit score of 780 and enough savings to live comfortably. But careful people can still be victims, especially when the predator knows exactly where all your vulnerabilities are hidden. Let me take you back to how this nightmare began. 2 years ago, my son Kevin called with news that made my heart swell. "Mom, I'm getting married. Her name is Vanessa, and I can't wait for you to meet her." At 68, I'd almost given up hope of having a daughter-in-law, of being part of a growing family again. Kevin was my only child, and after my husband Robert passed 12 years ago, it had been just the two of us navigating life together. Vanessa seemed perfect at first. She was 32, worked in pharmaceutical sales, and had that polished confidence that comes from spending your 20s climbing corporate ladders. When Kevin brought her to dinner at my house, she complimented my cooking, admired my garden, and asked thoughtful questions about my late husband. "Kevin talks about his father all the time," she said, taking my hand across the table. "I wish I could have met him. He sounds like he was an amazing man." I cried a little that night, something I hadn't done in years. It felt good to have someone new to talk to about Robert, someone who seemed genuinely interested in the memories I'd been keeping to myself for so long. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The wedding was 6 months later, a beautiful ceremony at the Botanical Gardens. I paid for the flowers, $2,500 worth of roses and peonies, because Vanessa mentioned her parents couldn't afford what she wanted. I was happy to help. That's what mothers do, right? We support our children's happiness. After the wedding, Vanessa started visiting me more often. She'd drop by with coffee, sometimes with homemade cookies, always with that bright smile and those questions that made me feel valued. "Patricia, I've been thinking about organizing my finances better. You were an accountant, right? Could you give me some advice?" I was flattered. Finally, someone who appreciated my expertise, who saw me as more than just Kevin's aging mother. We'd sit at my kitchen table, and I'd walk her through budgeting strategies, investment basics, the importance of maintaining good credit. "You're so organized," she'd say, looking at my filing system with admiration. "I wish I could be more like you. Do you think you could help me set up something similar?" That's when she suggested the birthday gift that would change everything. For my 70th birthday, Vanessa presented me with a beautiful leather portfolio, the kind with multiple compartments and brass closures. "For all your important documents," she said. "I noticed your files were getting worn. You deserve something nice to keep everything organized." I was touched by her thoughtfulness. I immediately transferred all my important papers into the new portfolio: birth certificate, social security card, passport, insurance documents, bank statements. Everything neatly organized in one place, just like Vanessa suggested. What I didn't know was that Vanessa had a second identical portfolio at home. And every time she visited, while I was making tea or showing her my garden, she was photographing my documents with her phone. Social security number, bank account numbers, credit card information, everything she needed to become me. The identity theft started small. A credit card from a department store I'd never shopped at. Then another from a gas station chain. Then premium cards from major banks. By the time I opened my mailbox that Tuesday morning in October and found 17 bills, Vanessa had been systematically stealing my identity for 8 months. My hands shook as I opened the first envelope. Victoria's Secret credit card. Balance, $3,200. I'd never shopped at Victoria's Secret in my life. The second envelope, West Elm Furniture. Balance, $8,900. I didn't even know what West Elm was. I opened every envelope with growing horror. Nordstrom, $4,000. American Express, $12,000. Best Buy, $5,000. Jared Jewelry, $9,000. The list went on and on, each balance representing purchases I'd never made, luxuries I'd never wanted. Total damage, $43,647. I called the first credit card company, my voice barely steady. There's been a mistake. I never applied for this card. Let me pull up your account, Mrs. Morrison. The customer service representative typed something. According to our records, you applied online on March 15th. We sent the card to 447 Riverside Drive. That was my address. What phone number do you have listed? She read it back. It wasn't my number. It took me 3 seconds to recognize it as Vanessa's cell phone. I called the second company. Same phone number. Third company. Vanessa's number again. Every single credit card had my information, my address for card delivery, but Vanessa's phone number for contact and verification. That's when the full scope of what had happened crystallized in my mind. My daughter-in-law hadn't just stolen my identity. She'd been systematically building a financial empire on my credit, using my good name and decades of careful money management to fund a lifestyle I couldn't even imagine. I wanted to call Kevin immediately, to tell him what his wife had done. But something stopped me. Some instinct honed from 38 years of tracking financial discrepancies told me I needed more information first. I needed evidence that couldn't be disputed or explained away. I spent the next week documenting everything. I made spreadsheets listing every credit card, every balance, every purchase. I called each company and requested detailed transaction histories. And as those statements arrived, a picture emerged that made me sick to my stomach. Vanessa hadn't just been careless with stolen credit. She'd been strategic. Designer furniture for their apartment. High-end appliances. A diamond tennis bracelet purchased from Tiffany's for $6,000. Luxury handbags from Louis Vuitton. Even a weekend trip to the Bahamas charged to an American Express card opened in my name. But she'd also been clever. Every month, she'd make minimum payments from her own account to keep the cards active and avoid collections calls. Every few weeks, she'd make a purchase at a store near my house, creating a paper trail that suggested I was the one using the cards. She'd even used my frequent shopper numbers at stores I actually patronized, blending her fraud with my legitimate purchases. The sophistication of it was almost impressive. Almost, if it wasn't destroying my life savings and credit score. I also discovered something else during my investigation. I called my credit monitoring service, something I'd maintained for years, and asked why they'd never alerted me to all these new accounts. According to our records, Mrs. Morrison, you called in March and requested that we stop sending alerts because they were becoming too frequent and causing you anxiety. I never called you in March. The silence on the other end was heavy. The call came from the phone number we have on file for you. Vanessa's number. She'd even disabled the one safety system I'd had in place to catch exactly this kind of fraud. I finally called Kevin on a Sunday afternoon, asking him to come over alone. Is everything okay, Mom? His voice carried that note of concern children never quite lose, no matter how old they get. No, sweetheart. Everything is very much not okay. I need to talk to you about Vanessa. He arrived within the hour, and I watched his face as I laid out the evidence. The 17 credit cards. The $43,000 in fraudulent charges. The phone numbers, the timeline, the purchases that perfectly matched furniture and jewelry I'd seen in their apartment. Mom, there has to be an explanation. But his voice lacked conviction. He was an engineer, a man who dealt in facts and evidence. And the evidence was overwhelming. Kevin, I need you to look at something. I pulled out my phone and showed him photos I'd taken at their apartment during my last visit. The West Elm couch, the KitchenAid mixer, the artwork on the walls. Then I showed him the credit card statements showing those exact items purchased in my name. That doesn't mean Vanessa did this. Maybe someone else used your information and coincidentally bought the same things we have. With your wife's phone number listed as the contact on every single account? I kept my voice gentle, but I needed him to face reality. Kevin, I know this is hard. But your wife has been stealing my identity for almost a year. He stood up abruptly, pacing my living room like he used to when he was a teenager trying to solve a difficult math problem. If this is true, if Vanessa really did this, you're talking about identity theft. That's a federal crime. I know. You're talking about sending my wife to prison. I'm talking about protecting myself from financial ruin and holding someone accountable for committing a serious crime against me. He turned to look at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in my son's eyes. Not anger, not disbelief, but fear. Fear that I was right. Fear of what that meant for his marriage, his future, his life. Let me talk to her first, he said finally. Before you do anything official. Please, Mom. Give me a chance to figure out what's going on. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to call the police immediately, to report the fraud and let law enforcement handle it. But this was my son, and despite everything, I wanted to give him a chance to process the betrayal before his life exploded. You have 48 hours, I said. After that, I'm filing a police report and contacting the fraud departments at every credit card company. This needs to be on record, Kevin. It's the only way to protect my credit and my savings. He left without another word, and I sat alone in my living room wondering if I'd just made a terrible mistake by waiting. The call came at 11:30 p.m. that same night. Kevin's voice was raw, broken in a way I'd only heard once before, when his father died. Mom, I confronted Vanessa. She admitted everything. My chest tightened. Part of me had still been hoping there was some explanation, some misunderstanding. But no. My daughter-in-law was exactly what the evidence said she was. A thief. She said she was going to pay it all back, Kevin continued. She said it got out of control, that she only meant to borrow a little bit to furnish the apartment because her sales commissions weren't coming through like she expected. Borrow $43,000 without asking? That's not borrowing, Kevin. That's stealing. I know. God, Mom, I know. I don't even know who I married. He was crying now, full sobs that made my heart break even as fury burned in my chest. What do you want me to do? Tell me what to do. Right now, I want you to secure all your own financial information. Check your credit cards, your bank accounts, everything. If she stole from me, she might have stolen from you too. She's my wife. She's a criminal, Kevin. And you need to protect yourself. The next morning at 9 a.m., I walked into the Riverside Police Department and filed a formal identity theft report. Detective Sarah Chun took my statement, examined my evidence, and her expression grew darker with each document I showed her. Mrs. Morrison, this is one of the most systematic cases of identity fraud I've seen, she said, making notes in her file. The fact that the perpetrator is your daughter-in-law actually makes it worse from a legal standpoint. She had access to you, to your trust, and used that to commit federal crimes. What happens now? Now we investigate. We'll need to contact the credit card companies, verify the purchases, and build a case. I'm also going to refer this to the FBI since it crosses state lines with some of these purchases. She looked at me with sympathy. I need to ask, are you certain you want to press charges? This will likely result in your daughter-in-law facing federal prosecution. I thought about that question. About Kevin, about the grandchildren I'd hoped to have someday, about the family dinners that would never happen now. Then I thought about my credit score, my savings, the decades I'd spent building a secure future that Vanessa had nearly destroyed in 8 months. I'm certain. The investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, Detective Chun uncovered even more fraud. Vanessa hadn't just opened credit cards in my name. She'd also applied for a personal loan for $15,000, used my information to secure a car lease, and had even attempted to open a home equity line of credit using a forged signature on my property deed. The total theft, including the attempted home equity fraud, exceeded $75,000. Kevin moved back into his old bedroom at my house during the investigation. Vanessa had been arrested and released on bond, and he couldn't bring himself to stay in their apartment surrounded by furniture bought with stolen money. I should have seen it, he said one night over dinner. The expensive clothes, the furniture, the trips. We were making good money, but not that good. I should have asked where it was all coming from. She was your wife. You trusted her. That's normal. Normal? Mom, she stole from you. She used your birthday gift as a tool to commit crimes. Nothing about this is normal. He was right. And the worst part was watching him blame himself for trusting the woman he'd married, for not seeing through her smiles and manipulations to the calculating criminal underneath. The arraignment came 4 weeks after I filed the police report. I sat in the courtroom watching Vanessa stand before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, her hair no longer perfectly styled, her makeup gone, looking smaller and more ordinary than I'd ever seen her. Mrs. Vanessa Morrison, you're charged with 18 counts of identity theft, wire fraud, and forgery, the judge read. How do you plead? Her lawyer, a public defender who looked barely out of law school, stood beside her. Not guilty, Your Honor. I felt Kevin tense beside me. We both knew she was guilty. The evidence was overwhelming. But I understood. She was grasping at any chance to avoid the consequences of her actions. The trial was set for 6 months later. In the meantime, I had to begin the painful process of cleaning up my credit. Each credit card company required affidavits, police reports, and hours on the phone explaining that no, I had not purchased a $6,000 Tiffany bracelet or an $8,000 sectional sofa. Some companies were sympathetic. Others suggested maybe I had made the purchases and simply forgotten. One particularly condescending representative implied that perhaps at my age, I was getting confused about my own financial activities. That's when I understood what Vanessa had been counting on. That I was old enough, vulnerable enough, that people might believe I was simply forgetting my own spending. That's why she'd made strategic purchases near my house, why she'd used my store loyalty numbers. She was building plausible deniability, creating a scenario where she could claim I'd simply gotten confused about who made which purchases. But she'd made one fatal mistake. She'd used her own phone number on every account. And that single decision, probably made out of convenience so she could receive verification codes and account alerts, became the thread that unraveled her entire scheme. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecutor presented overwhelming evidence: bank records, surveillance footage from stores showing Vanessa using cards in my name, testimony from credit card representatives about the phone number linked to every account. They even had recordings of Vanessa calling credit card companies, impersonating me, asking about balances and payment due dates. Vanessa's defense was that I had given her permission to use my information, that I'd asked her to help manage my finances because I was getting older and struggling with the complexity. Her lawyer painted me as a confused elderly woman who'd forgotten giving her daughter-in-law permission to help. I sat on the witness stand for 2 hours, answering questions about my financial management history, my accounting career, my credit score before the fraud began. The prosecutor asked me to recite my transaction history for the past 6 months from memory. I did, flawlessly, proving that my mind was sharp and my financial understanding was comprehensive. When the jury came back after 4 hours of deliberation, I held Kevin's hand. He'd testified against his own wife, confirming that the furniture and jewelry in their home matched the fraudulent purchases. It had broken something in him, I could see that. But he'd chosen truth over loyalty to a criminal, and I was proud of him for that. We, the jury, find the defendant, Vanessa Morrison, guilty on all counts. Vanessa's face crumpled. Her parents, sitting behind the defense table, started crying. Kevin squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but I didn't pull away. We both needed that anchor. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd seen too many cases like this, looked down at Vanessa with no sympathy. Mrs. Morrison, you didn't just steal money. You stole from a woman who welcomed you into her family, who trusted you, who tried to help you. You exploited that trust in the most calculating way possible, using sophistication and planning that shows clear intent. The court sentences you to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years supervised release, and full restitution of $75,347 to the victim. 5 years. Vanessa would be 37 when she got out. Her pharmaceutical sales career was over. Her marriage was over. Her life as she'd known it was over. All because she'd seen an elderly woman's kindness as an opportunity for theft. Kevin filed for divorce 3 days after the sentencing. We sat in my kitchen, the same place where I'd once taught Vanessa about financial management, and he signed the papers with shaking hands. I loved her, Mom. I really did. Or I loved who I thought she was. I know, sweetheart. How did you know? When did you realize she wasn't who she pretended to be? I thought about that. I didn't know. Not until I saw that phone number. But looking back, there were signs. The way she was always so interested in my documents, my finances. The questions that seemed thoughtful but were really reconnaissance. The birthday gift that made it easier for her to access everything. I brought a criminal into our family. No. You brought someone you thought you loved into our family. She chose to be a criminal. That's not on you. But I knew he'd carry that guilt for years. Maybe forever. A year later, I'm still dealing with the aftermath. My credit score has been restored to 760, climbing back slowly from the 480 it had dropped to during the fraud. I've recovered most of the money, not from Vanessa who has nothing, but from credit card companies who eventually acknowledged their verification failures. I'm still fighting with 2 companies who insist I should have been more careful with my information. Kevin is dating again, cautiously. He makes his girlfriends go through background checks now, something that breaks my heart a little because it shows how deeply Vanessa's betrayal scarred him. He's seeing a therapist to work through the trauma of realizing the woman he married had been systematically destroying his mother's financial life from their wedding day onward. I changed all my passwords, froze my credit, and now keep my important documents in a safe deposit box instead of at home. I'm more careful about who I trust, more suspicious of people who seem too interested in my personal business. It's a lonely way to live, but it's safer. Sometimes I think about Vanessa, sitting in federal prison, and I wonder if she regrets it. Probably not. People like her rarely regret the crime, they just regret getting caught. She saw an opportunity in an elderly woman's kindness and took it, simple as that. But I also think about what I learned from this nightmare. That being 70 doesn't mean being helpless. That being trusting doesn't mean being weak. And that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand up for yourself, even when it means destroying your son's marriage and sending your daughter-in-law to prison. The other day, I received a letter from Vanessa. She's allowed limited correspondence, and she used it to write me 3 pages of apologies and explanations. She claimed she'd been desperate, overwhelmed by debt from before she met Kevin, pressured by her own family expectations. She said she'd never meant to hurt me, that it had all spiraled out of control. I read it once, then burned it in my fireplace. Because here's what I learned: people who commit premeditated fraud for 8 months aren't desperate victims of circumstance. They're calculating criminals who made choices every single day to keep stealing, to keep lying, to keep violating the trust of someone who'd done nothing but try to love them. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from Detective Chun. Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to update you. Vanessa's case opened up a larger investigation. We found evidence she did this before, to an elderly man she dated before meeting your son. He thought he'd simply forgotten making purchases, never reported it as fraud. We're trying to track down other potential victims. My daughter-in-law wasn't just a criminal. She was a serial predator who specifically targeted elderly people, using romance and family ties to access their financial information. Kevin had unknowingly married a woman who made her living destroying vulnerable people's lives. Will there be additional charges? I asked. Possibly. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on some of the earlier incidents. She might be looking at additional prison time. Good. That probably makes me vindictive, but I don't care. Some people deserve every consequence they get. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Today, I sit in my garden, the one Vanessa used to admire so enthusiastically while she was photographing my social security card. I'm 71 now, my credit restored, my savings protected, my life slowly returning to normal. Kevin comes for dinner every Sunday, and we're rebuilding the relationship that Vanessa tried to destroy along with my finances. I'm more careful now, yes. More suspicious. But I'm also stronger. Because I learned that you're never too old to fight back, never too vulnerable to demand justice, and never too damaged to rebuild what criminals tried to destroy. Identity theft by family is particularly insidious because it exploits the deepest human need, the need to trust the people we love. Vanessa weaponized that need, turned my love for my son and my desire to be a good mother-in-law into a tool for financial devastation. But she forgot one crucial thing. People don't become accountants by being careless with numbers. And they don't survive 7 decades on this planet by being easily destroyed. She saw me as an easy target, a confused old woman with access to credit. What she should have seen was a fighter who'd spent 38 years tracking financial discrepancies and wouldn't stop until every single fraudulent transaction was documented, prosecuted, and reversed. The leather portfolio she gave me for my birthday? I burned that too, along with her letter. Some gifts are poisoned from the start, and the only way to be free of them is to watch them turn to ash. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments.